So today I'm using my simple natural unit here with the size 20 jars, and I'm just going to get this set up here while I wait for my dishwasher to finish up sterilising my jars. I use this bench here to put my Vacola unit on. Now I also I learnt the hard way, it's just a big tile. You can use a wooden chopping board, whatever you want, to put onto my bench, because I did have the unit sitting on here at one stage, and I now have a mark where the unit was sitting. So I used the tiles. I've got about 3 of these sitting around here, so that I can just put them straight on top of them, and the heat doesn't transfer through to my bench anymore. So these units are really simple to set up. I always keep my power cord inside my unit, so I know which one is to which of my units. So it's just a matter of putting power cords into power plug holes and into the power point, and it's ready to go. So I now need to add some water to just above the handle about here. I'll probably start about here, and then I'll get my jars into it. So my food's cold today, so I'm using cold water. Generally these Vacola units are for cold produce to put into it. I do a bit of cheat myself, though I did find in one of the books, the pressure canning books, that you can actually empty these halfway out and add some more cold water to it, and then go from there for the same processing time, just making sure that they don't boil. So if it does come to a boil, you don't let it boil for more than 5 minutes, and then you just switch it off and leave it for the rest of the processing time, which is generally an hour. So if those of you who are like me, when I'm in full canning mode, I have one of these units. I have a pressure canner, and I have a different Vacola unit, which is also an electric one, but it's a different metal one to this one. If you're using your bottler more than once in the day, go for it. Get yourself a big bucket or a big pot, empty your water out halfway, add some cool water so it's lukewarm water, and then start your processing time. Just make sure, generally it's 45 minutes to 50 minutes where most of these units will start to boil. Just allow an extra 10 minutes before there to make sure that you're checking your machine isn't boiling. So now I'm going to get this little baby filled up to about yay with water, because I'm going to use in size 20 jars. I would assume I'm going to need at least that much water in my jar. Just a quick note on that, if you are going to empty the water out of these, it will be hot water, so I suggest you make sure you get, like I have a Bunnings bucket that I've now used outside instead of inside, and that Bunnings bucket will hold that hot water, and it was a 20-litre bucket, so it stood about here. So to empty this into that, I didn't have to move the bucket until I wanted to put the water back in here once it cooled down. So just make sure you don't get those cheap plastic buckets that will melt the second you put hot water in them. For some reason I had a funny feeling there was something sitting in the bottom, so I had to double check that there was nothing in there. It's got me water up to about here now. I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll see once my jars go in there if I need to add a bit more water to it. Alright guys, so I've got my jars all done and ready to go. I'm just going to put them in here. Now I only ended up with 2 more jars left out of what I was doing. So that's all that's going in this unit. I don't generally like to do it with only 1 or 2 in it, but for the purpose of showing you guys how to do it today, I'm happy to do that. So the water level is only down here. I need to get the water level up here, so I'm going to have to get some more water in this unit. Okay guys, for this unit it's very, very vital that you put the amount of water into the unit that it is recommended on your instruction book. Now this one recommends to do it just above the handle lugs here, which is what I've done, regardless of the size of the jar that you're putting in there. So this means that the water is about 2 inches above the jars that are in here. If the jars are too tall for the unit and they stick out of the water a little bit, that is fine for that to happen. These units are too big for anything over a size 30 or a 31 or a 27. If you want anything bigger than that, you're going to have to get a bigger unit to actually do that into. So this is now full of water. I'll put the lid on. Plug my unit in. I always make sure that my tap is at the front so that I don't have to try and move this unit around when it's got hot water in it. So I just usually make sure it's there, so if I need to empty water out, I can do that quite easily from here before I move this unit. So now this unit needs to be on for an hour, so I'm going to put on a timer for this unit to be on for an hour. I am going to check it at about 45 minutes to make sure that it is not boiling. So these units are not meant to boil. If they do, you need to turn them off really quickly and let them still sit there for the full amount of time in your unit. And then you basically remove the jars. You can let it sit for a few minutes, but I generally remove them within 5 minutes of the counter coming to the end of its time, because it also needs that heat and change the temperature a little bit to make sure that the jars are filled on correctly. Just taking a quick look at the Vicola unit here. It has been on for about 35 minutes so far. So the unit itself is getting quite warm, and I can hear the sound that it's making, which is an indication that it will most likely start boiling within the next 5 to 10 minutes. And we normally wouldn't take the lid off, but I'm going to give you a quick peek in and just have a look and see what's going on. You can just see, you can see the bubbles that are rising up from underneath there. Which is just the air bubbles from the can, the jars, which is exactly what they're meant to do. It'll release the air out of them. So the process is doing what it's supposed to do, which is pushing the air out of the jars to seal them. You can see the water. It's a bit hard to see, but you can see that it's just looking like it's going to start simmering or boiling very shortly. So I'm now going to keep a bit of a closer eye on that to make sure when it starts to boil, I will then turn the unit off and just let it sit. So I have about another 7 or 8 minutes before I turn this unit off. It has not yet come to the boil, which is good, which means I can leave it on. But it is still bubbling from the jars, which is good. So I'll let that run for its full time. Then I'll turn the unit off. And then I will just let the unit sit for a few minutes before I remove the jars. So I've took the lid off and I'll just let it cool down a bit. It is still quite steaming here, but I'm going to be taking it out. Now these are size 20 jars in here, so these fit perfectly over the top of them to lift them out. They also fit perfectly over the size 27 jars. So this is what I'll be using. I still use a cloth to put underneath the jar. I'm scared that I'm actually going to let go of the jar and drop it if I don't have a correct good grip on it. So now if you don't have these equipment, which I didn't use to when I started using this unit, basically I used to just take some of the water out of it till it was below the jar level, probably about half of it, and then I would just use my two cloths like I did with the pressure canner. And lift the jars out that way as well, and that worked quite well. But I now have this handy little tool that I can just lift them straight out of the water without having to worry about them. So this is the water bath tomatoes. You can see they don't bubble as much as the pressure canned ones do. There's hot water dripping on my hand. But they look really good as well. So I do like to do both ways. Same process when pulling them out. Put them up on the where you're leaving them to sit. Try not to actually tip the jars when you pull them out. If there's water on top of them, just let that on top of them. Tipping them could cause the food to get caught under the seal, and if it's still pushing air out as it cools, it could push that food up under your seal. So now I'm just going to unplug this unit. It is a hot pot of water basically. I don't have little children around anymore, so I don't need to worry about them touching this because they're old enough to know not to. I'm just going to leave this here to cool down, and then again tomorrow I will sort this out. That water will be either used to go in the gardens and water some plants, or with this water being this hot, I could use this water to do my dishes. But yeah, so, or I would, if I was doing another lot of canning, I would empty it to about halfway sort of thing, and then add some fresh water to it and go again. Now, so this is the very last step for your tomatoes on day 3 here, is to check the seals. So remember, these with the 2 jars that we water bathed, and these with the 3 cans that we pressure can. And this one here, I noticed that the lid wasn't quite on properly, so we're just going to make sure we check this one well. So I found the best way with the Vacola lids to not disturb the lids is just to slide them off sideways. So just slide them off sideways, and then we're just going to grab the lid and just pick the jar up. The jar comes off the ground along with the lid. Your lid is pretty sealed, and a concave top. And this is the water bath one. It's not as obvious of a concave as the bigger jars, but it is definitely down, and again we are lifting off. So just push sideways. Lid is still on. You'll notice the difference in the tomatoes between the water bath and the pressure canning. This is a lot drier consistency than this one, even though they were out of the same batch. So there is a bit of a difference between them. And the last one with the crooked lid. I am assuming that this lid will still be sealed because the seal itself is not sticking out anywhere. It's just on crooked. And yep, it's holding itself up. It's got a concave. But I will put this one at the front of the pack. It will be one of the first ones I use because the lid is that little bit crooked, just to make sure that it's used first up. I'll probably even use this one before I use the ones that are already in the cupboard. So I'll let these sit there for a few more days, a couple more days, and come and do them another test, and then label tag them with the month, date, and what's in them, and then put them into the cupboard. So I usually just leave them a couple more days, just to make sure that if they're going to release, it will be pretty much in the next day or 2. And if they don't, then there is a very good chance that they won't release in the cupboard. I'm a bit of a rebel when it comes to using this specific machine. I do a lot of water bathing, which is the rapid boiling. So, which is what I do with my chutneys and relishes, jams, beetroots and things like that. So I will actually use this unit as a water bath canner rather than having a pot on the stove. If I don't have the space on the stove, if I've got everything else on the stove going, I will use this unit as a water bath canner. So basically I will just fill it up to just above whatever size jars I've got in there, turn it on and let it boil. Now a lot of people will say you can't do that. To me it's no different to using like a pot on the stove. It will heat the water up and boil it just fine. So obviously it does take that bit longer to heat up than it would on the stove, but if you don't have a pot big enough to use on your stove, which is generally I don't if I'm using 31s, so anything bigger than a 20, you generally can't find a pot that is tall enough to cover the jars. Even my big pot here, this is a jar size 31. You can see by the time I put something in the bottom of it, the jar itself would not be covered with water, and if it is covered with water, there's a very high chance of it actually boiling over and going everywhere. So even this is the biggest pot I have, so for anything like even the 27s, they are way too big for this pot. So I am a rebel and I will use this as a water bath canner. And if I've got several batches, say if I've done beetroot, I will probably have 15 or so jars that need to be processed at the one time. I'll have a pot on the stove for the smaller jars. I'll have, 4 or 5 of those sitting in one pot on the stove. Then if I'm using the size 20s, because I'm using the size 20 Ricola jars to do beetroots and stuff like that in now as well, I'll put those into this unit. So I'll have this unit going and I'll have that pot over there going with the smaller jar. It's boiling water, and that whole process of a water bath is boiling water for a certain length of time. So like I said, you cannot do any vegetables and things like that in this unless they are in vinegar or a acidic solution. So alright, with that guys, thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you on the next video. It's hot.